In 1962, cinema's two greatest monsters collided in a battle meant to thrill the world. But behind the rubber suits and wrestling throws was a production soaked in betrayal, lawsuits, classified weapons, and one legendary artist who would never live to see justice. Today, we uncover the strange, disturbing, and little-known truths behind King Kong vs. Godzilla, the film that changed monster history in ways most fans never realized. Fact number 1. This deal literally killed a Hollywood legend. Willis O'Brien was the man who gave the world King Kong in 1933, a technical wizard whose stop-motion animation defined an era of cinematic wonder. For decades, he dreamed of making the ultimate sequel, King Kong vs. Frankenstein, a stop-motion epic that would pit Kong against another legendary monster using the very technique he had pioneered. But while O'Brien struggled to secure funding, his unfinished concept was quietly sold overseas without his consent. Toho Studios took the idea, replaced Frankenstein with Godzilla, and transformed it into a rubber suit spectacle, cutting O'Brien completely out of the process and the profits. When King Kong vs. Godzilla premiered in 1962, O'Brien watched from the sidelines as his life's dream became someone else's box office triumph. Just weeks later, on November 8, 1962, Willis O'Brien suffered a fatal heart attack. His widow would later state that the crushing frustration surrounding the stolen project directly contributed to his death, making this cinematic clash not just a monster battle, but the tragic epilogue to one of Hollywood's greatest visual pioneers. Fact number 2, they ate one of the creatures after filming. One of the film's most infamous scenes features King Kong battling a massive giant octopus on a rocky shoreline, a sequence that looks chaotic, dangerous, and strangely alive. That's because it was. Unlike many special effects scenes of the era, Toho didn't rely on miniature models or rubber props for this attack. They used 4 real living octopi dragged onto the set and forced to grapple with the actor inside the Kong suit. The creatures fought wildly for their lives as cameras rolled, creating footage so unsettling that even seasoned effects crews were shaken by it. But the story doesn't end there. After filming wrapped for the night, special effects director Eiji Tsuburaya reportedly kept one of the octopus, took it home, and cooked it for dinner. The same creature that had been violently shoved into combat earlier that day became his evening meal, turning a terrifying stunt scene into one of the strangest and most unsettling production footnotes in monster movie history. Fact number 3, a real actor nearly died inside the Godzilla suit. Inside the towering suits of Kong and Godzilla were real men enduring suffocating heat, blinding darkness, and near constant physical danger. Shoichi Hirose played King Kong, and Haruo Nakajima, already a legend for surviving the brutal 1954 Godzilla suit, returned as the king of the monsters. During one heated moment on set, the rivalry between performers crossed a dangerous line. Hirose, eager to prove Kong's dominance not just on screen, but in reality, actually grabbed the full Godzilla suit and lifted it off the ground, with Nakajima still trapped inside. He then hurled the massive figure aside to demonstrate his own strength. This wasn't planned choreography, it was a real act of reckless bravado that could have resulted in serious injury or death. Nakajima was sealed inside a heavy, tightly bolted suit with limited airflow and almost no visibility. One wrong fall, one broken latch, and he could have been killed. Instead, the moment became an infamous behind-the-scenes legend, proof that even off-camera, the battle between these two monsters was brutally real. Fact number 4, the movie used a real weapon that was supposed to be a secret. In one of the film's strangest plot points, the characters deploy a real U.S. military nuclear weapon system known as the Davy Crockett, a portable nuclear missile launcher designed for battlefield use. What makes this inclusion so disturbing is that in 1962, when the movie was released, the Davy Crockett was still classified top-secret military technology. The general public was not supposed to know it even existed. Somehow, Toho recreated the weapon on screen with enough accuracy to alarm American military officials. Whether the filmmakers used leaked schematics, public speculation, or sheer coincidence remains unclear. But the result was a feature film that casually displayed a nuclear launch system that governments were still actively hiding from civilians. At the height of Cold War paranoia, With the Cuban Missile Crisis looming just months away, audiences unknowingly watched classified nuclear firepower presented as a monster movie plot device, blurring the line between fantasy, propaganda, and real-world atomic fear. Fact number 5. The creator of Kong tried to ban the movie forever. Merian C. Cooper, the co-director and co-creator of the original 1933 King Kong, was absolutely furious when he learned what had been done with his creation. He viewed King Kong vs. Godzilla not as a tribute, but as a humiliation. In 1963, Cooper launched a lawsuit attempting to halt the film's distribution entirely, furious that Kong had been reduced to what he called a man in a gorilla suit. He argued that the character had been belittled, exploited, and stripped of the majestic terror that once defined him. Cooper's anger wasn't just artistic, it was personal. He believed he retained ownership rights to Kong and that Toho had violated them outright. But the legal battle unraveled when Cooper couldn't prove exclusive ownership. Years of tangled studio contracts doomed the case, and the lawsuit collapsed. King Kong remained in Godzilla's shadow, and one of cinema's most iconic creators was forced to watch helplessly as his creation marched on without him. Fact number 6. The studio erased huge parts of this film on purpose. In one of the most destructive acts of studio carelessness in film history, Toho itself permanently damaged King Kong vs. Godzilla. In 1970, the studio prepared a special re-release for its annual Champion Matsuri Film Festival, an event designed to package older monster films for children. To save storage space and simplify editing, the original camera negative was physically cut apart. Entire sections were removed and discarded. Roughly 1/3 of the original negative was lost forever. From that moment on, every home video release became a complicated Frankenstein of surviving elements, patched together from faded 16mm prints, second-generation copies, and mismatched audio tracks. This single decision doomed the film to decades of inconsistent visual quality, missing shots, and altered pacing. What audiences have seen for generations is not the true original film, but a cinematic reconstruction built from scraps after the studio itself destroyed its own masterpiece. Fact number 7. Godzilla and Kong trash-talked each other in public. Toho didn't just market this film like a movie, they promoted it like a heavyweight prize fight. In one of the strangest advertising campaigns of the era, the studio released fictional interviews with both monsters as if they were professional wrestlers preparing for a title match. Godzilla boasted that his blood would boil and his flesh would dance at the thought of crushing Kong. Kong fired back with promises to fight to the last ditch for his championship. Newspapers printed these absurd interviews as promotional events, complete with mock quotes, championship hype, and dramatic build-up. Children debated who would win as if it were a real sporting event. This marketing strategy transformed the film from horror spectacle into a full-scale pop culture showdown, cementing the rivalry not as a story, but as a global contest, where audiences were encouraged to choose sides long before the monsters ever met on screen. Fact number 8. They secretly changed Godzilla's body for kids. Godzilla's appearance in this film is one of the most radical and controversial redesigns in the character's history. Toho deliberately softened his once terrifying look to appeal to younger audiences. His ears were completely removed. One of his toes was amputated, reducing his feet from 4 claws to 3. His jagged dorsal plates were grotesquely enlarged and reshaped to resemble an alligator's spines rather than the nuclear scars of 1954. Even his posture was altered to make him appear more upright and human-like. While the original Godzilla moved like a living natural disaster, this version stomped and gestured like a costumed wrestler. For longtime fans of the darker atomic allegory, this redesign was nothing short of sacrilege. Godzilla was no longer a symbol of nuclear annihilation. He had become a performing creature meant to entertain children rather than terrify adults. Fact number 9. Godzilla's scariest sound was removed on purpose. The transformation of Godzilla didn't stop at his body. It extended to his voice. The thunderous, earth-shaking roar of 1954 was deliberately altered for this film. Sound engineers took 2 of Godzilla's original roars, sped them up, and blended them together to create a higher-pitched, shriller version of his signature sound. The goal was intentional: make Godzilla less frightening and more playful for younger audiences. The result permanently changed how the character would sound in future films. What had once been the deep, echoing cry of nuclear devastation became a squealing battle call that bordered on cartoonish. This single sound design decision marked a turning point in Godzilla's cinematic identity, signaling his shift from apocalyptic destroyer to mass-market monster hero, a transformation that still divides fans to this day. Fact number 10. Millions believed this ending that never existed. For decades, fans around the world believed that King Kong vs. Godzilla had two different endings, one where Kong wins in the Japanese version and another where Godzilla wins in the American cut. The rumors spread through fan magazines, bootleg tapes, and even board games like Trivial Pursuit, where it was presented as fact. But the truth is far stranger. Both versions have the exact same ending. Kong emerges from the ocean alive, while Godzilla disappears beneath the waves. No alternate victory ever existed. The myth began in the 1960s through the American sci-fi fanzine Spacemen, which incorrectly reported that Japanese audiences saw a different outcome. The lie spread unchecked for decades before film historians finally debunked it through direct comparison of surviving prints. One false rumor became cinema truth for an entire generation, proving that sometimes the greatest monster myths exist entirely off-screen. Fact number 11. This movie became horror animation history. More than 40 years after its release, King Kong vs. Godzilla unexpectedly shaped one of Hollywood's biggest modern blockbusters. While animators at Industrial Light and Magic were working on Pirates of the Caribbean, they faced a major problem. There was almost no reliable reference footage of real octopuses moving aggressively on land. In a surprising turn, the team turned to this 1962 monster movie. The practical effects footage of the octopus attacking villagers created under terrifying real-world conditions became primary movement reference for Davy Jones's crew and the Kraken-like creatures in the Pirates franchise. A low-budget, mid-century kaiju film ended up quietly influencing billion-dollar digital cinema. The result is a rare example of a vintage practical effect rippling forward into modern CGI history, proving that sometimes the most unlikely sources become the backbone of cutting-edge technology. Fact number 12. This was the most popular Godzilla movie ever made. No other Godzilla film, not even the modern Hollywood reboots, has ever matched the raw theatrical reach of this one in its homeland. When King Kong vs. Godzilla opened in Japan, it drew over 11 million ticket buyers, a number that remains unmatched across the entire Godzilla franchise. It became the highest-attended Godzilla film of all time and the 13th most-watched movie in the entire history of Japanese cinema. To put that into perspective, it outperformed the Japanese releases of global phenomena like Star Wars and Avatar. For a nation still grappling with post-war identity and nuclear trauma, the showdown wasn't just entertainment, it was a national event. Streets emptied, children lined up for blocks. Godzilla and King Kong weren't just monsters anymore, they were cultural titans whose collision became one of the most viewed spectacles Japan had ever witnessed. Fact number 13. Kong was never supposed to be scary. Unlike the towering terror of Godzilla, King Kong in this film was intentionally designed to be comical and sympathetic. Special effects director Eiji Tsuburaya made a deliberate creative decision. Kong should be the monster that audiences root for, not fear. His facial expressions were exaggerated. His movements were more playful than violent. Even his posture and body language were softened to make him feel emotionally readable rather than monstrous. This shift completely rewrote Kong's cinematic identity. The tragic beast of 1933, who inspired awe, pity, and horror, was transformed into a crowd-pleasing hero figure designed for children. While this helped the movie become a box office sensation, it also marked the final break from Kong's original tragic tone. From this point forward, Kong would be remembered less as a doomed giant and more as a costume champion meant to thrill, not disturb. Fact number 14. The villain's name is a hidden monster joke. The entire plot of King Kong vs. Godzilla is driven by a greedy, bumbling television executive named Mr. Tako. To Japanese audiences, the name carried a deeply unsettling hidden meaning. Tako literally translates to octopus. That makes the mid-film giant octopus attack not just a random monster encounter, but a grotesque inside joke. In symbolic terms, the creature named Octopus is literally assaulted by an octopus born from the chaos he unleashed. The detail becomes even darker when viewed as corporate satire. Tako exploits monsters for profit, just as real networks exploited sensational television stunts in the 1960s. Then the monster strikes back. What appears to be a silly name choice is actually a biting layer of metaphor, greed feeding on itself, devoured by the very spectacle it created. Fact number 15. They hid a 1933 Kong reference in plain sight. During one of the film's most famous combat moments, King Kong attempts to force a massive tree directly down Godzilla's throat. On the surface, the moment plays as slapstick monster violence, but in reality, it is a deliberate homage to a piece of lost cinematic history. In 1933, a rare publicity photograph showed O'Brien's stop-motion Kong performing the exact same action on a Tyrannosaurus Rex, jamming a tree into its jaws during their legendary battle. By recreating the pose with live-action suits 3 decades later, Toho silently paid tribute to the very effects work that had inspired their own monster legacy. It was one of the few moments in the film where Kong's tragic mythic roots briefly resurfaced, hidden in plain sight within a single violent gesture. Fact number 16. America destroyed the original film. When King Kong vs. Godzilla crossed the Pacific, it didn't arrive intact. American producer John Beck drastically re-edited the movie for US audiences, slicing out large portions of the original Japanese footage and inserting brand new scenes featuring American actors playing newly invented news reporters. Entire story beats were altered or removed, but the most devastating change came through sound. Legendary composer Akira Ifukube's original score, one of the emotional backbones of the film, was ripped out and replaced with recycled stock music pulled from older Universal monster movies like Creature from the Black Lagoon. The result was a version of the film that barely resembled the original in tone or meaning. What had been designed as Japanese satire and spectacle was reshaped into fragmented monster television. For decades, this mutilated cut became the only version many American fans ever knew. Fact number 17. The film is actually a brutal roast of corporate greed. Beneath the monster wrestling spectacle, director Ishiro Honda was telling a far darker story. The entire plot of King Kong vs. Godzilla is structured as a brutal satire of 1960s Japanese television and corporate exploitation. The greedy executives don't care about danger, death, or destruction. They care about ratings. Monsters are treated as marketable products. Villages become backdrops for publicity stunts. National disasters become televised entertainment. Honda was quietly condemning how mass media had begun to commercialize fear and spectacle for profit. This theme was no accident. Honda had lived through real wartime devastation and nuclear terror. By turning monsters into broadcast commodities, he was warning that society itself had begun to treat catastrophe as entertainment. What appears to be a silly monster movie is, at its core, an indictment of modern media obsession. Fact number 18. One hidden location created decades of Godzilla battles. This film introduced one of the most important physical structures in kaiju history. Toho's massive outdoor water tank, known simply as the Big Pool. Built specifically to stage large-scale aquatic monster battles, this facility allowed filmmakers to simulate oceans, coastlines, harbors, and flooded cities with unprecedented realism. Every crashing wave and underwater impact in King Kong vs. Godzilla helped prove the pool's cinematic value. From that moment forward, nearly every Toho monster film relied on the Big Pool for destruction sequences. It remained in constant use for over 4 decades, from 1962 until its demolition in 2004. Entire generations of Godzilla, Mothra, and Gamera battles were born in that water. One concrete basin quietly became the backbone of Japanese monster cinema. Fact number 19. For 50 years, no one watched the same version. For most of its life, King Kong vs. Godzilla didn't exist as a single stable film. It existed as a patchwork of warped versions. Because the original negative had been destroyed, distributors were forced to combine surviving 35mm footage with heavily degraded 16mm prints. The result was a visual nightmare. Scenes would abruptly shift in clarity, contrast, and grain. Audio would drift out of sync. Entire shots would appear soft and ghostly, as if pulled from a different dimension of the same movie. For decades, no two home releases looked quite the same. The film literally existed in multiple visual realities at once until 2016, when an extensive 4K restoration finally reconstructed the closest possible version to the original theatrical cut, ending decades of cinematic instability. Fact number 20, a lost animation technique secretly made it into the movie. Despite budget cuts killing Willis O'Brien's intended stop-motion vision, his influence still haunted the final film in quiet fragments. Careful frame-by-frame analysis reveals brief moments of real stop-motion animation hidden inside the live-action chaos. When the giant octopus grabs a fleeing native, the movement shifts unmistakably into miniature animation. And during Godzilla's infamous airborne dropkick, perhaps the most surreal moment in franchise history, the physics briefly betray the hand-animated roots of classic monster cinema. These fleeting seconds are more than technical curiosities. They are the last scattered fingerprints of the man whose dream had been taken from him, tiny remnants of the art style that was meant to define the entire film. King Kong vs. Godzilla wasn't just a battle between two giants. It was the collision of artistic dreams, corporate greed, Cold War fear, and cinematic evolution. One legend died without justice, another transformed forever, and the world watched, unaware of the true cost behind the spectacle. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden history behind this monster clash, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more cinematic deep dives, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next descent into the dark side of movie history. Because behind every classic, there's a story far stranger than the screen ever showed you.